98.1 FM and AM 1220.
This is KHTS News Director Michael Brown. Thank you for joining us live this morning. Already starting off on a great foot.
Jason Gibbs is here.
Jason Gibbs in the house. Jason Gibbs just sworn in less than 24 hours ago at one of the longer city council meetings.
There's no taking it back now, Michael. It's done.
And now you're officially on the Santa Clarita City Council.
Yes,
How are
sir.
you feeling today?
Feeling better. It feels a little more real now. I kind of made a joke, I think, at the dais that I think they wanted that meeting to go real long because Bob was really holding on to that seat. But no, man, it's wonderful. It's humbling. It's a delight. It really is. I know I'm sitting here going, okay, let's get to work. It's time to go. And like, no, our next meeting's not till January. Enjoy your holidays. I'm like, we're just getting rolling. Come on, we can really cause some trouble now.
So you mentioned Bob Keller. So he just retired, and you're taking his seat after 20 years. I know that he kind of served as a mentor for you. He endorsed you on the campaign, and talking to him earlier last week, he mentioned he left you a couple of things in the office and asked you to read a couple things to prepare you for the seat. How does it feel to be taking Bob's seat into your own mentor seat, kind of like a passing of the baton sort of deal?
So, they talk about nerves and, were you nervous that night of the getting sworn in? And I wasn't until we watched for 2 hours people calling, writing videos, the staff and the council saying these incredible things and seeing what Councilman Keller had did in his 20-year tenure. And coupled with that, the accolades, and appropriately so, the accolades that were given to Mayor Smythe for steering the ship, if you will, during one of the hardest years in this city's, if not country's, history, then you start to realize you really have a lot of work ahead of you. This is what you're being compared to now. And so that's when all of a sudden the hands started getting a little clammy, and I'm starting to think if my Portos joke was good enough to say, but well, it's out there now, so here we go. But no, so Bob, it's interesting. A lot of people thought the first time I met Bob was after the appointment process back in 2016. I had never met any of the council members, and Bob was the first one who set up a meeting at City Hall East, as it's called out there at his little place in Coco's. And we were sitting there chatting, and one of the things he said to me at the end of our meeting was, Jason, it's so nice to see a face that I've never seen at City Hall. And he said he was so impressed with, he didn't know me at the time, but he was so impressed with my resume, what I've done with my life, and the reasons I'm here and my desires. And he said, Jason, for a guy like me, I've been here a long time. And my next step, and he said it jokingly, but he said, but my next step is over at Eternal Valley. And I said, oh, okay, Bob, this is getting real. He said, but it's so important for us to know what's going to come next. And we didn't know that it would culminate into running and being put on city council, and I sure didn't. But he said, just whatever you do, please don't disappear. Stay involved. Be involved in the community. It's a wonderful place. And 4 years later, it happened. It's still a little surreal in that sense. When I look back at all the people who've applied, who've been involved in this community, the absolute giants, when you look at the men and women of the year that have served, and then now to sit at the dais with some very incredible people, it's extremely humbling. It really is.
Now, you're no slouch yourself. In those 4 years, you were volunteering around the community, very active, I know, in the Wish Foundation over with the Heart District. So that kind of helped you kind of understand the players in the game, so to speak, here in Santa Clarita. But what have you been doing since you found out, hey, looks like I'm going to be elected to city council here, what was it, like a month ago or so? And now, what have you been doing to prepare for sitting at that seat?
I shut down. For the first time in 4 years, I completely separated myself from the idea of campaigning and politics altogether, and spent a lot of time focused on the reasons that I'm there. And the reasons are easy for me. It's for the love of my family and my wife and my kids, and a community that I've gotten to know very intimately over the next 4 years. And I knew that once you come into office, it changes. People look at you different. They talk to you a little different. I still hope people will be comfortable joking with me, and as we mentioned before we started, I have kind of a little self-deprecating sense of humor, and that's not. I don't plan on changing. I don't want that to change, and so I just disconnected for a little bit. For the first time in 3.5 years, I wasn't on, if you will. I wasn't trying to campaign. I wasn't trying to raise money. I wasn't trying to convince voters. I was just enjoying the reasons that I'm doing this. And, well, it's gone now, so now we're in. Now it's time to turn back on.
So I know we've got a few weeks here until your first actual full city council meeting, so to speak, come in January. Every city council member has had their own kind of priority or priorities going in.
Sure.
We have now Mayor Pro Tem Lorraine West, who's always been an advocate for open space and trails. Councilwoman McLean, who's always been about transportation. What do you feel that your priorities are going to be over the next 4 years? What's going to kind of be your cornerstone issues?
Sure. No, I ran on the last 4 years. I still really like the idea of investigating a public safety commission. I think with this election, and one of the things you're seeing with the new DA, with Metro J, with a lot of changes in public opinion on what policing is, everyone's looking for the talk. And I think looking at like a blue ribbon for a commission like that is an important place to start. So often we get uncomfortable talking about things that's very polarizing. And as elected leaders, you need to be able to do it. And you need to be able to do it in a way where you're not looking down on somebody that disagrees with you, and you're not just holding up the people who do agree with you. You want to have both those voices in the room to try to find what's best for the community. So I'm really big on that, I think. But I'm going to take a little time with it. Most people say, as soon as I get in the seat, I'm going to start doing things. No, I don't think that's necessarily an effective way to do it. I want to take a little time over the holidays and coming into the new year and really start thinking about how I want to approach doing these things, and not just come out and say, okay, staff, go take care of this for me. That sounds great. But so that's one big one. And then I mentioned it again last night just in comments, but with the mid-year budget change, one of the things they did is they were able to allocate an additional $3 million to paying down some of our accrued long-term pension obligations. One of my big cornerstone things was to get us 100% funded in our long-term liabilities on CalPERS pensions, I think it said within the next 5 to 6 years. And I think they were already on track to get fairly close to that. And one of the reasons I push for that is twofold. One, whatever money you can start saving on those pension liabilities, it just increases it substantially in terms of the value of that dollar if you're paying it now versus 20 years. But more so, it's to put us in that frame of mind that it is irresponsible and dangerous to pass such long-term heavy cost burdens onto the future generation, onto the people. So people that are going to sit in those seats in 20 years, I want them to be able to have the flexibility to put the visions that they have set forth and not just have to worry about how they're paying for the money that was allocated 20 years ago. And then the last one is, I think Senator Wilk mentioned it, talking about the cleanup at the Burmite property. That's the donut. That's the hole in the donut here in Santa Clarita. You have your Saugus and your Canyon Country and your Newhall and your Valencia, but the center of town is still open. And I kind of picture when you look at Disneyland, you walk into a hub before you break off into each of the lands. So one of the things I'm going to look into doing is that's the hub of our wheel. And that's the last big vision piece of Santa Clarita. So what's going to represent and bring Santa Clarita together when you have such different areas in town? And that's going to be my big one. And with the cleanup coming done, it's now time to really rethink what was thought of 25 years ago and come forward with that.
Now, you mentioned earlier kind of a very interesting year 2020's been. In a lot of ways, in the city, in the state, in the nation, very divided right now. Our residents are. Particularly here in the city, how do you think, or how are you going to approach trying to kind of bring people together, at least on a city basis? Obviously, there's not much you can do as a city council member for the nation, but on a Santa Clarita level, what are some things you want to do to try and bring people together?
Well, it's easy. You just do it. I mean, it sounds funny when people say, Jason, how did you get involved? How did you get into the committees? How did you get involved in the nonprofits? It really is that simple. You just do it. You show up and be a part of it. It's the same thing when you're talking about these difficult issues and these divides. Again, when you're talking about policing and public safety, you remember that you're not here representing a political party. You're not here representing an ideology. You're here representing nearly 250,000 people in the city of Santa Clarita. And every person's opinion has value. Even if it's 180 degrees different than what you think, it's important to understand how they see the world in their eyes. Because if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to broaden what you're looking at and not narrow the vision. It's the idea, if you're looking at a lawn and you got one little area of green grass and you just focus your vision, you'll always think everything's great. you really need to step back and see other people's challenges. And you may find that you already have answers, or the answers are already there for people who are struggling with things, and they just don't know it yet. Maybe they didn't get the outreach. Maybe they didn't see that tweet or that email or that Facebook post on something the city provides. Or even better, you'll see where a hole is and see how you can fill it with something that the city can do that's positive.
Now, another big part of 2020 is the COVID-19 pandemic. I feel awful bringing it up because it seems like it's everywhere in our life every single day, but I got to ask about it going forward into the next year and maybe even the next 2 years, hopefully not, but maybe the next 2 years. How are you going to be approaching the city in terms of handling this pandemic? I know we talked about it a little bit during the campaign, but now that we have a little bit more time, tell me, what are some things that you as a city councilman are going to be doing?
COVID is one of those things that we were just mentioning now. It is so difficult to talk about because you will find camps of people that say, you need to hide, you need to shut everything down, not even masks are enough. I want everybody completely in their houses and never coming out for weeks. And then you have the people that think it's a big government intrusion and all these masks are, going after people's rights and it's about control. As a city councilman, the hardest and most frustrating thing is we're very limited on what our ability is to innovate and to try. When this all came down, I remember it very vividly in March. The shutdown came in. Even people who were concerned about the idea of shutting the government down, the fear of what COVID could be at the time was so significant that I think people stepped back and said, okay, this is happening, so let's do it and embrace it. And then you started getting into all the discussions of just flatten the curve work, and then the spikes are coming, and then we're blaming protests and we're not blaming protests. We're blaming people that are hanging with their friends or going to restaurants. And as city council, we get so stuck because we fall under the guise of the health department out of LA County. We fall under the rules of LA County Health. We fall under the rules of the state. So even if we had the most brilliant idea that we could come up with, this as we think this will open up 80% of our restaurants, this will open up business, if we can't get our partners in government on board, we really have our hands tied. But the one thing you can always do as a city council member is nonstop advocation. And one of the things that Councilwoman West has talked about is the UVC work. I think the importance of that is bringing that out to the forefront as a discussion, saying, look, we have ways to put in systems and technologies that kill viruses. We have ways that you can keep the protocols of masks, keep your distancing, keep the separation of tables, the various outdoor dining. And Tori, we and I were talking about not having fully enclosed outdoor areas, but have ways for circulation models. You increase circulation models of air. You increase using technology in UV. But we need somebody to be allowed the ability to test that and to do it. And if it doesn't work, shut it down. You don't do it. But to just simply keep putting our head in the sand and hiding, we're going to sit on this roller coaster of businesses opening up. We see a spike, we shut them down. They can't survive like that. I mean, you saw when after there was the 3-2 vote at LA County to shut down all the restaurants. So they shut them down, but immediately LA County said, we also have this grant program to help these businesses who have to stay shut down. We don't want you to go under. The system was flooded. And I've seen all these things on Facebook of people who are spending hours just trying to get in because they can't operate their restaurants, but you still have overhead, you still have taxes, you still have your rents to pay. That doesn't go away, and we can't forget about that. So it's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it, but you have to keep the discussion going. We can't just sit back and hope people will get complacent and stop worrying about it because it's uncomfortable to talk about. You have to keep talking. You have to keep trying. And when you're wrong on something, you're wrong on something. But when you're right on something, you're right on something. You got to embrace both of it. You can't just hope everything's perfect all the time.
And I remember that day that I think it's Keep LA Restaurants Open or something like that. When that first opened, we were getting reports in the first 5 minutes that the website crashed.
Yep.
So an absolute huge number of restaurants, I believe over 31,000 in the county total, shut down over this. You mentioned that we're very limited in what we can do since we are under the jurisdiction of Los Angeles County's Health Department. Mayor Smythe, or then Mayor Smythe, I should say, proposed the creation of our own health department, which, the approval and the go-ahead was given to kind of research that, and I believe the research should be coming out in the next couple of months, at least initially. Now that you've had some time to think about it further, maybe had time to talk to some of the other council members, where do you stand on getting our own health department? Should it just be Santa Clarita? Should we try and get kind of a North County coalition, or should we just not do it?
So to actually give you my opinion on a decision until I see the data that we get from staff, honestly, it would be irresponsible to do it. Like talking about any developments that come down the road or anything the city can do, until you have the information to make a decision and put yourself in a corner, it's dangerous and it's not smart in my mind. But all that being said, there are obviously positives. If we can show and break ourselves away in a governmental structure where we can open and open safely and do so because we have our own health department, there's a cost associated with running a health department, but there's a huge cost in business and people's lives not being able to operate as well. And as a council member, your job is to balance all of it and to just make your decision on what you think is best. The only worry I have at the moment is if we show a model that says, look, we can run our own health department, we can do it, that's not a huge economic impact on the people. Like you said, maybe we tie in with Palmdale or the North County and Lancaster. If the governor or the state decided, no, we need to do just a massive shutdown, doesn't matter if we have a health department or not. We still have a governmental structure above us that can limit us. So I worry about the idea that this is the golden ticket, if you will, that we do this and we can operate the way Santa Clarita wants to and we'll be fine. We need to keep all those things in place, because what would be more sad than spending all of that staff time, money, and resources to input this huge bureaucracy for the right reasons, and then 48 hours later being told it doesn't matter, we're all shutting you down and all your businesses are shut down. So all of it has to come wait and see where it lands.
So the obvious solution is that Santa Clarita should just secede and be its own state.
Well, yeah, it's its own state. Well, West Virginia did it some time ago. Why don't we follow that model, right?
So to get a little bit less serious with you, we got to talk over the phone around the time that you had kind of started to learn that you were going to be city council member. You hadn't declared just yet, but your nearest competitor had conceded. But you were kind of on your own, I believe, driving home somewhere, driving to somewhere. When you sat down with your wife, when you sat down with your family, and it really just kind of sank in for all of you that, yes, I'm going to be on the city council, talk to me a little bit about what that was like.
Oh.
I know I said less serious.
No, it's interesting because my wife had declared me a victor long before I had. And I remember I came home and she put a post up about it and just had it said like "good job" or something on a banner, and they had like an ice cream cake, and my kids wrote a little note, and it's surreal because I go back to what I was saying before of it. You know, my first step into City Hall, I mentioned in my speech last night, was 4 years ago. I'd never met a city council member. The first event I ever went to in this town was the State of the County in 2018. So it's still surreal because there are people who've been doing this for 30 years, who've wanted to sit at the dais for so long, who are good people, and this guy out of left field who's gone to events for 2 years is all of a sudden sitting there. So even when my wife had just made the decision that we had won before I had, it was still just daunting to accept.
Well, the wife's always right. So
well, I wasn't going to disagree with her. And the
She's a keeper, by the way. I just want to interrupt here.
Oh, go ahead,
She's
Tori.
a keeper, Jason. I've tried to keep quiet as long as I could. She's a keeper for sure. But congratulations, and I love the little Post-it note story. Excellent.
Thank you. No, my wife's amazing. She's not a political person. She doesn't do politics. It's never been her thing. But she's been instrumental for two big reasons. The first obvious one is when you're gone, when you're campaigning, when you're at a city council meeting, she's home alone taking care of our kids. And my wife works full-time. She's a full-time engineer. She was the reason that we moved here to the Valley. So every moment that I'm away is just more responsibility for her. So this doesn't happen without her blessing. And I've often said in 2018, I mean, I went full bore when I jumped in. I mean, I was everywhere. I felt I was never home. It was either work or campaigning. And after the campaign was done and I decided that I was going to stay involved and do it, I needed her because she pulled me aside and said, look, I don't mind that you're doing this and I love that you're doing this, but if you can't shut it down and you can't come home and be a father and be a husband and not just think about what somebody said on Facebook or something nice somebody said or something mean somebody said, then this is too damaging. It's going to hurt the family structure. You need to remember why you're doing this, and you need to remember the reasons you're here. And if you can't, you really need to think about if you can do this. And if we had never had that conversation, I don't think I would be here today. I don't.
I said 5 minutes ago, she's a keeper. What a support system you have in her, because you don't realize until you're in it, if that person, that you're married to, your spouse, does not support this idea, it can become damaging. She's an amazingly smart woman to see all this and get you, on a clear path. And look at where you guys have now ended up. I'm so excited. Michael Brown, I'll be quiet now.
No, it's okay, Tori. It gives me time to rest my voice. But no, I'd like to echo that. It really does take, it takes a village to raise a child, but I'd say it takes a village to support a politician, especially a city council member. It's funny. I joke with my wife, and she not so jokingly tells me, she'll tell me, I'll stick with you through thick and thin, but the only thing that would cause me to leave you is if you ran for office. So it takes a very special kind of woman to stick with somebody through something like that. So I think you're going to be great, and you're going to be fine with that support system.
I'll tell you, Mike, is interesting. Maybe a bigger testament to who she is, and then we'll stop talking about how great she is. She has even said to me before, because I had no political aspirations of any kind. I watched the news, I followed some politics, but I wasn't a political guy, and that didn't happen until after we had kids. So we had dated, had known each other for 6 years. We get married. We're just living our lives, having a great time, and all of a sudden I decided to get in politics. She has told me, if I knew you were going to be a political guy, I don't know that we would have ever been together, because that was not something that she had envisioned in her life. But the testament to who she is and to the vow that she took, she said, but you're my husband, and I will support you, and I will always be there for you, as long as you are remembering the reasons that you're here and doing these things. And it's I think so often, as I mentioned earlier, about the ability to talk, it's the same in politics as it is inside your home. You have to be able to have uncomfortable discussions and real discussions, because you will come out better for them, even if it ends poorly, or if it doesn't, you don't come to a consensus. That uncomfortableness is important.
Now, winding down here, last question, and not a serious one, actually, this time.
Oh, all right.
We're last night viewing the 4-hour city council meeting, and you got to come up, you got to swear your oath, and then you made some comments and you cracked some jokes that I was laughing at.
Thank you.
I loved it.
Tori,
but
thank you.
Largely fell
We're a
on
good audience.
on a dead audience there. And I just want to ask you, are you going to be trying to keep that? Are we going to be expecting the Jason Gibbs jokes of the week when we get there? Or
Gibbs jokes of the week.
Or are we going to be or do you feel that that dead crowd is going to hamper it all?
So, I mean, I don't see my personality or how I act change. I do joke. I do like to break tension and break ice. But when the time calls for it, I can be the most serious person as well. And I think that throws people off more than my humor. Now, people who've never met me, you walk into City Hall, you're sitting at the dais, you've just replaced the legendary Bob Keller, and you're cracking jokes about Portos. That doesn't scream Bob Keller-esque, if you know what I mean. So I think that's where the crickets came from. But
we were laughing, but we weren't there. But it's just nice, we were talking before, when you arrived and we weren't on air yet. It's nice, it's nice. Everybody needs a little change, and the seat was available for you. And I think, you're going to bring a lot to the table. And yes, you can turn it off. You can be very silly, and we have a lot of fun here when you come into the station. But as soon as we ask you a serious question, you're on it. And I think that's needed. I think the balance is what we need, and especially 2020 brought us so much heartache and so much confusion and division that a personality like yours, I think, is really welcome. I must say, the jokes, and you know what? Maybe they just need to get used to you.
that's what I'm thinking.
But
you're coming in hot is the way I call it.
Because we had a great time. We were laughing. So just give it some time, and I'm glad to hear that you're not going to change who you are.
No.
That's great. That's great, because I think we need some balance.
If I do start changing, you'll let me know, right, Tori?
You know we will.
Tori will be the first one on the phone. Jason, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Congratulations on being sworn in. Thank you for coming in, and it's just always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Michael, my pleasure, you guys. Thank you.
98.1 FM and AM 1220.
Accidents happen, but rest assured.